What would you do if you found a journal detailing a journey into a place where compasses fail and shadows move on their own? A place where ancient bones protrude from blood-red earth and the very air seems to whisper warnings in a language long forgotten? Would you turn away and forget what you saw, or would curiosity pull you deeper into the mystery? That same fatal curiosity that claimed Elijah Carter in the spring of 1910. The Grand Canyon holds many secrets beneath its majestic exterior. Vast and ancient, its winding corridors of stone have witnessed countless deaths and disappearances over the centuries, but few have generated the persistent whispers that surround the case of Elijah Carter. If you enjoy uncovering dark historical mysteries that challenge rational explanation, consider following our channel for weekly explorations into the unexplained corners of American history. The story begins with a weathered leather journal recovered from a ranger station in 1948, nearly 4 decades after its owner vanished without a trace. The journal belonged to Elijah Carter, a 43-year-old treasure hunter from the hills of eastern Tennessee. Before we delve into its disturbing contents, we must understand the man who wrote it and the circumstances that drew him to his doom. According to census records from 1890, Elijah Carter was born in a small mining settlement near the Cumberland Gap. His father, a coal miner, died in a shaft collapse when Elijah was just 9 years old. Local newspaper archives describe how young Elijah began working in those same mines before his 12th birthday, developing an intimate knowledge of underground spaces that would later serve him in unexpected ways. By his 20s, Carter had earned a reputation as what locals called a seeker, a special breed of prospector with an almost supernatural ability to locate valuable mineral deposits. The Knoxville Herald described him in 1902 as a man who could sense gold in the earth like a divining rod senses water. A former associate interviewed for this documentary recalled Carter had eyes that seemed to look right through the ground. He would walk across terrain that professional geologists had dismissed and point to a spot saying there is something here, and damned if he wasn't right more often than not. Carter's successes allowed him to leave the desperate poverty of Appalachian mining communities behind. He traveled extensively throughout the American West, following rumors of untapped riches from the Black Hills to the Sierra Nevada. By 1910, his name appeared in mining records across 7 states. But what drew this experienced prospector to the remote northern rim of the Grand Canyon? The answer lies in a series of newspaper clippings found pressed between the pages of his journal. The Arizona Republic from February 12, 1910, contained a small article titled "Strange Discovery in Canyon Depths." It described how a group of surveyors working for the Santa Fe Railroad had stumbled upon what appeared to be ancient structures deep within a previously unexplored side canyon. The article quoted the expedition leader, Professor Samuel Winters of Chicago University, who claimed the structures displayed architectural elements inconsistent with known Native American building techniques of the region. The professor planned a return expedition in the spring to document the find more thoroughly, but historical records indicate this expedition never materialized. A second clipping from the Flagstaff Examiner, dated March 3rd, mentioned unusual magnetic anomalies reported by geological survey teams working in the same area. Compasses would reportedly spin wildly in certain locations, making traditional navigation impossible. The newspaper speculated about unusual mineral deposits causing the phenomenon. Carter had underlined this section heavily and scrawled a single word in the margin: gold. The final clipping, dated April 1st from a small local paper called The Canyon Echo, contained something even more intriguing. A brief interview with an elderly Hualapai man named Thomas Red Cloud described tribal legends about a forbidden place within the canyon. A place where, according to Red Cloud, the ancient ones still walked between the worlds of the living and the dead. The article dismissed these claims as superstitious folklore, but noted that several tribal members refused to guide tourists or surveyors to certain areas along the northern rim. Carter arrived in the small settlement of Supai on April 18, 1910, according to the guest ledger of the now demolished Canyon View Hotel. The hotel owner's daughter, interviewed in 1972, recalled him as a quiet man with intense eyes and a Tennessee drawl who asked endless questions about the canyon's northern rim and the stories told by the native tribes. She remembered her father warning Carter to stay away from a place the locals called the Shadow Canyon. He told him strange things happened there, she recalled. Animals wouldn't go near it. Compasses didn't work right. Even experienced guides got lost and some never came back. But Carter just smiled like he knew something nobody else did. The journal entries begin on April 20th, 2 days after his arrival. The handwriting, initially neat and methodical, chronicles his preparations and early explorations. Carter wrote of hiring a local guide named Joseph Williams to take him part of the way toward the northern rim, though Williams refused to venture beyond a certain point, citing tribal boundaries and dangerous terrain. The guide's reluctance only seemed to strengthen Carter's resolve. April 23, 1910. Williams left me at the Western Ridge this morning, pointing toward a narrow trail that he claims will lead me to the area described in the newspaper accounts. He seemed genuinely afraid, making signs to ward off evil and refusing the extra money I offered. Before departing, he told me a strange story about his grandfather, who had once ventured into what he called the Shadow Canyon as a young man. According to Williams, his grandfather returned 3 days later with no memory of where he had been. His hair turned completely white. The old man never spoke about what he had seen, but would wake screaming in the night until his death. Superstitious nonsense, but the fear in William's eyes seemed genuine enough. I will proceed alone from here. My supplies should last 2 weeks if I ration carefully. Carter's journal describes his journey deeper into the canyon network over the next several days. He noted unusual rock formations, ancient petroglyphs, and the increasingly difficult terrain. By April 27th, he reported finding the first signs of what he believed were artificial structures, partially collapsed cave entrances that showed evidence of stonework. The journal entry from that day includes a crude sketch of symbols carved into the rock above one such entrance. Professor Alastair Henderson of the Anthropology Department at Arizona State University examined these drawings for our documentary and confirmed they match no known Native American writing system from the region. The temperature drops at least 15 degrees as I approach these openings, Carter wrote. There is a constant breeze flowing outward, carrying a scent I cannot identify, something metallic and ancient. I made camp 50 yards away rather than directly beside the entrance. I cannot explain why, but something about this place fills me with profound unease despite my excitement at the discovery. The silence here is absolute. No birds, no insects. Nothing lives in this part of the canyon. The entries over the next 2 days detail Carter's careful exploration of what he described as a vast network of partially collapsed tunnels and chambers extending deep into the canyon wall. He noted finding fragments of pottery, unlike any he had seen before, with unusual geometric patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. More disturbing were his descriptions of animal bones scattered throughout certain chambers, many showing signs of deliberate arrangement in patterns similar to the symbols carved above the entrance. April 30th contains the first mention of what Carter referred to as the bone field, a large open area within the canyon where the red earth was littered with fossils and skeletal remains. What makes this discovery remarkable is that the remains appear to belong to species I cannot identify, he wrote. Some resemble large reptiles, but with anatomical features I have never encountered in my studies of natural history. Others seem almost human in their structure, yet grotesquely elongated and with additional joints in the limbs. Most disturbing are the skulls, similar to human skulls, but with pronounced bony ridges and eye sockets too large and oddly angled to be those of any human being. Carter collected several bone fragments, carefully wrapping them in cloth and storing them in his pack. He expressed his belief that these specimens would revolutionize scientific understanding of prehistoric life in North America. That night's entry noted his first experience with what he described as auditory anomalies. I was awakened by what sounded like voices carried on the wind, speaking in a language I could not comprehend. The sounds seemed to emanate from the deeper recesses of the tunnel network, rising and falling in a rhythm almost like chanting. When I lit my lantern to investigate, the voices immediately ceased. I told myself it was merely the wind through the rock formations, but I cannot shake the feeling that someone or something is aware of my presence here. The entries for the first week of May show a marked change in Carter's writing. His neat, measured handwriting became increasingly erratic. Sentences trail off mid-thought, only to resume with seemingly unrelated observations. He repeatedly mentioned the feeling of being watched and described dreams filled with symbols, similar to those carved in the rock. Most concerning is his description of what he called the doorway, discovered on May 3rd, approximately half a mile deep within the tunnel network. The doorway stands approximately 8 feet tall, perfectly rectangular, and carved directly into the living rock. Its surface is covered entirely with symbols, similar to those at the outer entrance, but far more complex and numerous. They seem to radiate outward from a central figure that resembles a twisted human form surrounded by concentric circles. The stone itself has an unusual quality, almost metallic in appearance, despite being clearly stone to the touch. Most remarkable is that my compass spins wildly when brought near it, the needle rotating continuously in a counterclockwise direction. I cannot explain this phenomenon, but it suggests some form of magnetic anomaly consistent with the presence of significant mineral deposits. Perhaps this doorway guards the treasure I have sought. Carter attempted to open what he believed to be a door or portal by pressing on various symbols and searching for hidden mechanisms. He reported no success, but noted a strange phenomenon. When I place my hand upon the central figure, I feel a vibration, subtle but unmistakable, like the purring of some great beast beneath the stone. More troubling still, I could swear the symbols around my hand rearranged themselves when I removed it, though that must surely be a trick of the poor light or my overtired mind. The entries from May 4th and 5th detail Carter's continued attempts to open the doorway, along with increasingly frequent reports of strange sounds echoing through the tunnels. He described what sounded like footsteps following behind him, always stopping when he turned to look. His sleep was disturbed by vivid nightmares in which he found himself standing before the open doorway, gazing into a vast chamber filled with ancient machinery and silent watching figures. Upon waking from these dreams, he repeatedly found himself not in his camp, but standing before the actual doorway with no memory of having walked there. On May 6th, Carter made a discovery that would change the course of his expedition. While examining the tunnel walls near the doorway, he noticed a narrow fissure barely wide enough for a man to pass through. Squeezing through this opening, he found himself in a small chamber containing what he described as a stone altar. Upon this altar lay a small object, which he initially took to be a carved figurine. The object appears to be made of a material similar to jade, but with an unusual reddish tint, Carter wrote. It depicts a humanoid figure with elongated limbs and a head bearing pronounced ridges similar to the skulls I observed in the bone field. Most remarkable is the craftsmanship. Under my magnifying glass, I can discern details so fine they would seem impossible to carve with primitive tools. The eyes in particular contain minute pupils with radiating lines so delicate they can barely be seen with the naked eye. The figure seems to convey a sense of motion despite being static, as if captured mid-stride. I have wrapped it carefully and added it to my pack. If nothing else comes of this expedition, this artifact alone should prove of significant scientific interest. That night's entry is particularly disturbing. Carter reported waking to find the figurine had somehow escaped its wrappings and rested atop his chest. More alarming, he described finding a series of small, perfectly circular bruises on his arms and chest in a pattern that matched the position of the figurine's hands and feet. I must consider the possibility that I placed the object there myself while sleepwalking, he wrote. Yet this does not explain the bruises, which are tender to the touch and growing darker by the hour. I find myself reluctant to replace the figurine in my pack. There is something compelling about it. I feel a strange comfort when holding it, as if it were a talisman of some kind. Perhaps I will keep it close for now. The entry for May 7th is brief and troubling. Carter described returning to the doorway and placing the figurine against the central symbol. The results were immediate and dramatic. The entire doorway began to vibrate, and a thin line of light appeared around its edges. The symbols carved into its surface began to glow with a pale bluish luminescence. Most alarming, Carter reported hearing what sounded like a mechanical grinding from behind the stone, as if ancient machinery were being activated for the first time in centuries. I backed away in alarm as dust and small fragments of stone began to fall from around the doorway, he wrote. The grinding sound grew louder, and I feared the entire tunnel might collapse. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The light faded. The vibration ceased. But the door had changed. Where before it seemed a solid piece of carved stone, now a thin seam was visible around its edges. I believe it has unlocked, though it remains closed. I shall attempt to open it tomorrow after I have rested. Something tells me I will need my full strength for what lies ahead. The entry for May 8th describes Carter's successful opening of the doorway. After several hours of effort, he managed to slide the massive stone panel aside, revealing a passage leading deeper into the cliff face. The air that rushed out was cold, and carried an odor he described as ancient and somehow wrong, like the breath from a tomb sealed for millennia. He noted that his lantern burned with a strange bluish flame when held near the opening, suggesting unusual atmospheric conditions within. Despite his growing unease, Carter's scientific curiosity compelled him forward. The passage beyond the doorway was unlike the rough-hewn tunnels he had navigated previously. Its walls were smooth and covered with intricate carvings depicting what appeared to be humanoid figures engaged in complex rituals or ceremonies. Carter noted that many of the figures resembled the elongated form of the jade figurine, interacting with smaller figures that he took to represent humans. Some of the scenes depicted appeared to show the taller beings imparting knowledge or tools to the humans, while others showed what might have been religious ceremonies involving raised stone platforms similar to the altar where he had found the figurine. The passage descended at a gentle angle for approximately 200 yards, before opening into what Carter described as a vast underground chamber. His lantern could not illuminate the full extent of the space, but he estimated it to be at least 100 yards across, with a ceiling rising 30 or 40 feet above. Most remarkable were the structures within the chamber, which Carter likened to a small city built entirely of stone. Buildings of various sizes arranged in concentric circles around a central plaza, containing what appeared to be a large well or shaft descending into darkness. Carter spent hours documenting what he could see of this underground complex, making sketches and notes about the unusual architecture. The buildings showed no signs of doors or windows, but rather circular openings in their upper portions that seemed designed for beings that could climb or jump to significant heights. He noted that while the structures were clearly ancient, they showed remarkably little deterioration, as if the stable environment of the cave had preserved them perfectly through the centuries or millennia since their construction. As fascinating as this discovery was, Carter's journal indicates he was becoming increasingly concerned about his own physical and mental state. He described persistent headaches, disturbing dreams, and moments of disorientation where he would find himself in different locations with no memory of how he had gotten there. Most troubling was his growing obsession with the jade figurine, which he had taken to wearing on a cord around his neck. "I cannot bring myself to part with it even momentarily," he wrote. "When I set it aside, I feel a crushing anxiety that only subsides when I touch it again." I know this reaction is irrational, perhaps even symptomatic of some illness contracted in these caves, yet I cannot overcome it. The entry for May 9th describes Carter's exploration of several buildings within the underground city. He found them mostly empty, though some contained stone furniture of unusual design, and what appeared to be tools or implements made of an unknown metallic substance that he described as warm to the touch and surprisingly light. In the case of Elijah Carter, we may never know which outcome awaited him in the depths beneath the Grand Canyon. His journal ends with those disturbing symbols, but his story continues in the whispers of those who have ventured near that forbidden zone, in the nightmares of rangers who have served along the northern rim, and in the persistent rumors of government agencies working in secret to contain something they refuse to acknowledge publicly. If you find yourself hiking the remote trails of the Grand Canyon and come across unusual symbols carved into the red stone, or feel a sudden chill in the air when no wind blows, or hear what sounds like distant voices speaking in a language you cannot understand, remember the fate of Elijah Carter. Remember that curiosity, while the driving force of human progress and discovery can sometimes lead us places from which there is no return. Places where ancient eyes watch from the shadows and patient hands that are not quite human reach out to welcome us home. For some mysteries, the price of knowledge is higher than we can possibly imagine. And in the deepest recesses of the earth, in the shadow of one of America's most majestic natural wonders, something waits that has been waiting since before the first human beings walked these lands. Something that once guided and shaped primitive humanity for purposes we can only guess at. Something that may one day emerge again when the stars align and the ancient symbols awaken to their true purpose. Until that day, the whispers will continue to echo through the canyons on moonless nights. The magnetic anomalies will continue to confound scientific instruments. The dreams will continue to trouble those who venture too close to certain unmarked caves along the northern rim. And somewhere in the darkness below, perhaps Elijah Carter continues his transformation, becoming something no longer human, but still remembering, in some diminishing corner of what was once his mind, the green hills of Tennessee and a life beneath the sun. The Grand Canyon holds many secrets, but none perhaps as terrible and profound as what lies hidden in its forbidden depths. The ancient ones still walk between the worlds of the living and the dead, just as Thomas Red Cloud warned over a century ago, and the door that Elijah Carter opened still stands ajar, waiting for the next seeker brave or foolish enough to step through into the darkness beyond. What they might find there, no one living can say with certainty, but if the legends of the native peoples are to be believed, what finds them in return may be far older and more terrible than anything in our conventional understanding of history. Far older and infinitely patient, having waited countless millennia for the brief fleeting creatures that now rule the earth, to once again acknowledge their true progenitors and the debt owed to those who first shaped human consciousness from clay, in the words carved into stone deep within that hidden place, translated by no human tongue, but somehow understood by all who glimpsed them in dreams or fevered visions. We were here before, we shall be hereafter. The cycle turns, the stars shift, the gate opens, and you, our children, will remember what you have tried so long to forget. The tale of Elijah Carter serves as both warning and invitation, a testament to the eternal human drive to uncover that which has been hidden, regardless of the cost, and a reminder that some truths once discovered cannot be undiscovered. Some knowledge once gained cannot be unlearned. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. As you leave this documentary and return to the comfortable certainties of your daily life, perhaps you will dismiss this story as mere legend or fabrication. Perhaps you will file it away with other tales of mystery and the unexplained that pepper the American landscape. But perhaps, in those moments between waking and sleeping, when the mind drifts untethered through the shadowlands of consciousness, you too will catch glimpses of ancient symbols carved in stone. You too will hear whispers in a language no living human has ever spoken. You too will feel the gentle but insistent tug of something very old, calling you toward the hollow places of the earth, where answers await for questions you didn't know you were asking. And perhaps, like Elijah Carter before you, you will one day find yourself standing before a doorway carved with symbols no Christian man should ever see, with a choice to make that is no choice at all. For curiosity, that most human of traits, is also the most dangerous. It has led us to the stars and to the depths of the ocean. It has unveiled the mysteries of the atom and the reaches of distant galaxies. But it has also led us, time and again, to peer into abysses that peer back with ancient, patient eyes. What happened to Elijah Carter in the spring of 1910? The answer may lie buried in classified government files or sealed behind security fences in a restricted zone of the Grand Canyon. It may be whispered in the oral traditions of native tribes who have learned through bitter experience to fear certain places and the entities that dwell within them. Or it may be lost forever, like so many other mysteries that have vanished into the fog of history and legend. But one thing remains certain. The Grand Canyon stands as it has for millions of years, vast and ancient and filled with secrets we have only begun to uncover. And somewhere within its labyrinthine depths, beyond the paths walked by tourists and casual hikers, there are places where compasses spin and shadows move of their own accord. Places where the bones of creatures that were never catalogued by science protrude from blood-red earth. Places where the very air seems to whisper warnings in a language long forgotten, but somehow still understood in the deepest, oldest parts of the human mind. And perhaps, just perhaps, in the darkest and most remote of those places, Elijah Carter still walks between the worlds of the living and the dead, transformed but not destroyed, a vessel for something that was ancient when humanity was young, a warning and a promise of what awaits us all when curiosity finally overcomes caution, and the door that has remained ajar for over a century opens fully at last. Until that day comes, the whispers will continue, the legends will persist, and the forbidden zone deep within the Grand Canyon will remain exactly what it has always been, a place where the veil between worlds grows thin, a place where the past and future converge in the timeless present, a place where the true history of our species waits to be rediscovered, for better or for worse. Some say that on the anniversary of Carter's disappearance, May 11th, strange lights can be seen moving along the canyon walls near the restricted zone. Lights that follow no natural pattern and correspond to no known human activity in the area. Others claim to have heard singing on that night, old Appalachian hymns carried on the wind from sources that cannot be located. Park rangers officially dismiss these reports as the product of imagination and the canyon's notorious acoustic properties, which can distort and carry sounds in unpredictable ways. But those who have heard the singing firsthand tell a different story. They describe voices that sound almost but not quite human, singing words that are familiar but somehow wrong, as if learned phonetically without understanding their meaning. And beneath the singing, barely audible but impossible to ignore once noticed, a rhythmic chanting in that other language, that older tongue that no living human has ever spoken, but that calls to something deep within us nonetheless. The most recent documented incident occurred in 2022, when a group of hikers, camping near the boundary of the restricted zone, reported being awakened shortly after midnight by what they described as a procession of lights moving along the canyon rim. Through binoculars, they claimed to see figures walking in single file, carrying objects that emitted a pale bluish glow. The figures themselves were difficult to discern clearly, but appeared unusually tall and thin, with movements described as graceful but somehow wrong, as if their joints bent in ways that human joints do not. Park rangers investigating the report the following day found no footprints or other evidence of anyone having passed through the area. However, one ranger noted that his compass behaved erratically throughout the investigation, the needle swinging wildly before settling into a slow, counterclockwise rotation that persisted until he left the vicinity. His official report mentioned this anomaly only briefly, attributing it to possible mineral deposits in the area affecting magnetic instruments. What they found next would challenge everything we think we know about the history of North America and perhaps humanity itself. But that, as they say, is another story, one that continues to unfold in classified briefings and sealed archaeological sites, in the nightmares of those who have ventured too close to certain caves, and in the whispered warnings passed down through generations of those who have always known that some places on this earth belong to entities far older and more terrible than humankind. The truth about Elijah Carter and what he discovered in the depths of the Grand Canyon remains hidden, like so many other inconvenient truths that challenge our comfortable understanding of history and our place within it. But the questions remain, waiting for answers that may prove more disturbing than the mysteries themselves. What compelled a seasoned prospector to venture alone into a place feared by local tribes for generations? What did he find in that underground city, with its alien architecture and strange artifacts? What transformation did he undergo in those final days as he descended into the well at the center of that ancient complex? And most importantly, what still waits there, patient and ancient, for the next curious explorer who, like Carter, refuses to heed the warnings until it is far too late? The answers, if they exist at all, lie somewhere in the shadow of the Grand Canyon, in a place where the modern world intersects with something far older and more mysterious. A place where the boundaries between myth and reality, between history and legend, between human and other, grow thin and permeable. A place where Elijah Carter vanished more than a century ago, leaving behind only a tattered journal filled with disturbing accounts of what he found there and what, perhaps, found him in return. And so the mystery remains. Another strange tale in the long history of human encounters with the unknown. Another warning ignored, another door left ajar, another whisper from the darkness that most will dismiss, but some will hear all too clearly in the silence of the night, calling them toward the hollow places of the earth where ancient eyes still watch and wait for our inevitable return. One structure, larger than the others and positioned near the central plaza, he discovered what he believed to be a library or archive. Stone shelves lined the walls, holding hundreds of tablets covered in the same unusual symbols he had seen throughout the complex. I have attempted to document some of these writings, though I have no hope of deciphering them without years of study, Carter wrote. What is remarkable is that when I focus on certain groupings of symbols, I experience a strange sensation, as if ideas or concepts are forming in my mind unbidden. It is almost as if the writings bypass the normal process of reading and interpretation, communicating directly with my thoughts. This is surely a psychological curiosity, perhaps my mind attempting to impose meaning on these alien patterns, yet the experience is most unsettling. That night, Carter camped within the underground city, rather than returning to the surface. His journal entry describes increasing auditory hallucinations, including whispered voices that seem to emanate from the central well. The voices, though incomprehensible, filled him with a sense of yearning and sadness. "I feel as if they are calling to me specifically," he wrote, "as if they have been waiting for someone to find this place after long ages of silence. The rational part of my mind insists this is mere fancy, yet I cannot shake the feeling that there is truth in it, that I was meant to come here, that I am expected." The entry for May 10th marks a significant turning point in Carter's account. He described approaching the central well after hours of hearing the whispered voices calling to him. The well itself was approximately 10 feet in diameter, with a raised stone rim carved with symbols similar to those on the doorway. The shaft appeared to descend vertically into darkness, with no visible bottom even when Carter held his lantern over the opening. A narrow staircase spiraled downward along the wall of the shaft, disappearing into the gloom below. "I know I should not descend alone," Carter wrote. "Every principle of safe exploration demands that I return to the surface, report my findings, and return with a properly equipped expedition. Yet I cannot bring myself to leave." The voices have grown more insistent through the day. They promise knowledge beyond anything known to modern science, secrets about the true history of our world and those who came before humanity. I tell myself these are hallucinations brought on by isolation and the unusual environment, yet they feel more real than the stone beneath my feet. The figurine grows warm against my chest, as if encouraging me onward. I will rest tonight and begin my descent at first light, though in this eternal darkness, such distinctions seem meaningless. The final dated entry in Carter's journal is from the morning of May 11th. The handwriting is shaky and difficult to decipher in places, suggesting he was in a state of extreme agitation or illness. He described preparing for his descent into the well, gathering his remaining supplies, and tying additional lengths of rope around his waist to use as a safety line. Most disturbing is his description of physical changes he believed he was experiencing. "The bruises where the figurine touched me have spread and darkened," he wrote. "The skin around them has taken on a strange texture, almost scaly. My joints ache and feel somehow loose, as if the bones are shifting within them. When I caught a glimpse of my reflection in my canteen water this morning, I hardly recognized myself. My eyes have grown larger, the irises expanded until almost no white remains. My brow seems more pronounced. I tell myself these are hallucinations or effects of the poor light, yet the changes feel physical and real." The entry continues with a description of Carter's mental state that suggests he was experiencing some form of psychosis or extreme psychological distress. "I no longer fear what waits below," he wrote. "The voices have become clearer through the night. They speak of transformation and rebirth, of ancient knowledge preserved for worthy vessels. I understand now why I was drawn here, why I alone among so many prospectors felt the call of this specific place. I was chosen." The final line of the dated entry reads simply, "I go now to meet them." What follows will be a new chapter in human understanding of our true origins. If I do not return, know that I have not perished but transcended. The remaining pages of the journal contain no dated entries, but rather a series of increasingly erratic writings that suggest severe mental deterioration. Interspersed with fragments of English text are sections of symbols, similar to those Carter had documented on the walls and tablets of the underground city. In places, the handwriting shifts dramatically, becoming angular and precise in a manner entirely unlike Carter's normal script. The content becomes increasingly incomprehensible, with references to entities or concepts that have no clear meaning. The old ones wait in dreaming. The angles between worlds grow acute. The star alignment approaches. The last decipherable passage, written in a hand barely recognizable as human, reads, "They wear us like garments, these bodies of clay. Soon I shall wear another, and another after that, until the cycle completes and the gate stands open once more." The final pages of the journal contain nothing but row after row of the alien symbols, meticulously drawn with what appears to be obsessive precision. The very last page contains a single drawing that takes up the entire sheet. It depicts a humanoid figure with elongated limbs and an enlarged cranium, standing beside what appears to be a normal human for scale. The proportions and anatomical details match precisely with the skeletal remains Carter described finding in the bone field. Around this figure are concentric circles filled with symbols, creating a pattern remarkably similar to that on the doorway he had discovered. At the bottom of the page, written in English but in the same angular, precise hand as the symbols, are the words, "I am become the vessel." The door opens both ways. The journal itself was discovered by a park ranger named Michael Hawkins on June 3, 1910, approximately 3 weeks after Carter's last dated entry. According to Hawkins' official report, he found the journal inside Carter's abandoned camp, near the entrance to a small side canyon along the northern rim. The camp showed signs of having been undisturbed for some time, with Carter's supplies still nearly arranged but partially consumed by local wildlife. A search party was organized, but no trace of Carter himself was ever found, despite an extensive effort that covered several square miles of extremely difficult terrain. The case might have ended there, filed away as yet another unfortunate disappearance in the vast and dangerous wilderness of the Grand Canyon. However, the discovery of Carter's journal and its disturbing contents prompted a more thorough investigation. In July 1910, a team led by Professor Samuel Winters, the same researcher mentioned in the newspaper clipping Carter had saved, mounted an expedition to locate the site described in the journal. What they found, or claimed not to find, would add another layer of mystery to the already bizarre case. According to Professor Winters' official report, submitted to both the University of Chicago and the Department of the Interior, his team was unable to locate any cave system matching Carter's descriptions, despite following his journal directions precisely. They found no bone field, no carved doorway, and certainly no underground city. The professor suggested that Carter had either fabricated his account entirely or had ventured into a different area than that described in his journal, perhaps becoming disoriented in the confusing terrain of the canyon network. This might have been the end of the matter had it not been for two troubling inconsistencies in Winters' account. First, 2 members of his expedition team resigned from the university immediately upon their return and refused to discuss their experiences when contacted by journalists. Second, a local guide who had accompanied the expedition later told a very different story to a reporter from the Flagstaff Examiner. According to this guide, who requested anonymity in the article, the expedition had indeed found a cave entrance matching Carter's description, complete with unusual symbols carved above it. However, upon approaching this entrance, Professor Winters had ordered the team to retreat immediately and later instructed them to report that nothing had been found. The guide claimed that Winters had appeared extremely agitated after examining the symbols and had been overheard muttering that some things should remain buried. The Examiner published this account on August 12, 1910, but the story gained little traction. Professor Winters denounced it as the fabrication of a disgruntled employee who'd been dismissed for incompetence, and the anonymous guide never came forward publicly to defend his claims. The matter gradually faded from public attention, becoming just another strange tale in the already mythology-rich history of the Grand Canyon. However, The story of Elijah Carter and his mysterious discovery continued to circulate in more esoteric circles. In 1926, an obscure journal called the Theosophical Review published an article titled Ancient Civilizations of Prehistory: Evidence in the American Southwest. The article referenced Carter's journal, though it's unclear how the author obtained access to it, and suggested his discovery provided evidence for the existence of a pre-human civilization that had once inhabited North America. The article was largely dismissed by the scientific community, but found a receptive audience among those interested in alternative archaeology and occult history. Perhaps most intriguing are the reports that continued to emerge from the Grand Canyon region in the decades following Carter's disappearance. Park rangers and guides occasionally reported strange phenomena in the area where Carter was believed to have vanished. Unusual magnetic disturbances affecting compasses and, later, electronic equipment. Unexplained sounds described as whispers or chanting carried on the wind. Visitors experiencing vivid nightmares featuring symbols similar to those described in Carter's journal, despite having no knowledge of his account. In 1943, a hiker named Thomas Blackwood disappeared in roughly the same area. When search parties found his backpack 3 days later, it reportedly contained dozens of pages covered in drawings of symbols nearly identical to those in Carter's journal, though Blackwood had no known connection to Carter or knowledge of his story. Blackwood himself was never found, and the official report cited an accidental fall into one of the canyon's many inaccessible crevices as the likely cause of death. 5 years later, in 1948, a forest fire swept through part of the northern rim, temporarily closing the area to visitors. During the firefighting effort, a team of rangers discovered a small cave entrance that had apparently been exposed by the fire. Inside, they found human remains later identified through dental records as belonging to Joseph Williams, the guide who had initially led Carter part of the way into the canyon before refusing to continue. Williams had been reported missing in August 1910, 4 months after his last known contact with Carter. The official investigation concluded that Williams had returned to the area, perhaps to look for Carter, and had become lost or injured in the cave system. However, this explanation fails to account for one disturbing detail noted in the coroner's report, but largely overlooked at the time. The body was found in a seated position against the cave wall, with both hands apparently engaged in carving symbols into the stone when death occurred. The symbols, photographed but never published, reportedly bear a striking resemblance to those described in Carter's journal. The discovery of Williams' body coincided with the recovery of Carter's journal from an old storage room in the ranger station where it had apparently been misplaced decades earlier. This renewed interest in the case briefly, but with most of the original witnesses deceased, and the area itself now restricted due to concerns about preserving archaeological sites, no formal reinvestigation was launched. The journal was transferred to the Department of the Interior Archives in Washington, D.C., where it remained largely forgotten until 1971. That year, Dr. Eleanor Hayes, an anthropologist specializing in Native American folklore, came across references to Carter's journal while researching Hualapai legends about the Grand Canyon. Her requests to examine the journal were initially denied, but after persistent efforts she was granted limited access. Her subsequent paper, The Carter Incident: Folklore, Fact and Fabrication, published in the Journal of American Ethnography, approached the case from a skeptical but open-minded perspective. Hayes suggested that while Carter had likely fallen victim to an accident or exposure, his journal entries reflected his contact with authentic Native American legends that had been largely suppressed or forgotten. Most significant was Hayes's discovery that several of the symbols described and drawn by Carter appeared in obscure Hualapai pictographs dating back hundreds of years. These symbols were associated with legends about the hollow places beneath the earth where, according to tribal elders, the Ancient Ones still dwelled. Hayes noted that similar legends existed among other tribes of the region, all featuring common elements. Beings that were not quite human, who had once walked the earth openly. A great conflict or cataclysm that had driven them underground. Warnings about certain places where the boundary between their world and ours grew thin. Hayes attempted to organize an expedition to the area described in Carter's journal, but was denied permits by both the Department of the Interior and tribal authorities. Her subsequent requests to conduct further research on the subject were similarly rejected, and she reported facing unusual resistance from academic institutions when seeking funding or support. In a private letter to a colleague, later published after her death in 1983, Hayes wrote, "I have come to believe there are some subjects that powerful interests prefer remain unexplored. The more I pursue this matter, the more doors close before me. One must wonder what they fear might be found." In the decades since Hayes's work, the story of Elijah Carter has become part of the unofficial lore of the Grand Canyon, occasionally referenced in books about unsolved mysteries or paranormal phenomena in the American Southwest. Park rangers are officially discouraged from discussing the case with visitors, though some still share watered-down versions of the tale around campfires. What they found next would change everything we thought we knew about early civilizations in North America. But there is one final troubling chapter to this story that has never been widely reported. In 2005, a routine geological survey of the northern rim identified an unusual magnetic anomaly in the approximate area where Carter was believed to have vanished. The anomaly created significant interference with survey equipment and prompted a more thorough investigation. Ground-penetrating radar revealed what appeared to be a vast network of chambers and tunnels extending deep into the canyon wall, far larger and more complex than any natural cave system known to exist in the region. Plans for a scientific expedition to explore these structures were reportedly in development when the entire project was suddenly classified and placed under the jurisdiction of an unnamed government agency. The area was permanently closed to the public, ostensibly for environmental protection and preservation of archaeological resources. The geologists and other scientists involved were required to sign non-disclosure agreements, and no official explanation for the unusual radar findings has ever been provided. A former park ranger who worked in the area during this period agreed to speak with us on condition of anonymity. According to this source, in the weeks following the discovery, unusual activity was observed in the restricted zone, unmarked helicopters coming and going at night, equipment being transported under heavy security, personnel in specialized protective gear entering the canyon and not emerging for days at a time. Most disturbing were the sounds reported by those camped near the perimeter of the restricted area, mechanical noises like heavy machinery operating deep within the earth, and sometimes carried on the wind at night, what sounded like voices chanting in an unknown language. The ranger requested a transfer after experiencing what he described as persistent nightmares featuring symbols he had never seen while awake, but which, when shown Carter's journal drawings years later, he immediately recognized. "I would see them carved into stone in my dreams," he told us, and behind them, something waiting. Something that had been waiting for a very long time and was finally being disturbed again. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever we had found down there, we should have left it alone. Just like the native legends warned, some doors aren't meant to be opened. Official requests for information about current activities in the restricted zone have been consistently denied or ignored. Satellite imagery shows only what appears to be a small research station, though local residents report continued unusual activity in the area, particularly at night. Tribal elders from the Hualapai and other native groups have expressed concern about the government's activities, but have been reluctant to speak publicly about their specific fears. As for Elijah Carter himself, no trace has ever been found beyond his abandoned camp and mysterious journal. No grave, no remains. Nothing to indicate what ultimately became of the prospector who ventured too deeply into the hidden places of the Grand Canyon. But according to some local guides, on certain nights when the moon is dark and the canyon winds blow from the north, visitors camping near the restricted zone sometimes report hearing a faint voice carried on the breeze, a voice singing old Appalachian hymns in a Tennessee accent, as if trying to find its way home from somewhere impossibly far away. And perhaps most disturbing of all is a report filed by a maintenance worker at the Department of the Interior Archives in 2018. According to this report, during a routine inventory of historical documents, Carter's journal was discovered to be missing several pages, specifically those containing the most detailed drawings of the symbols he had encountered. When questioned about this discrepancy, Archive supervisors insisted the journal had always been in its current condition, despite clear evidence of pages having been removed. The maintenance worker who filed the report was transferred to another department the following week, and subsequent requests to examine the journal have been denied. What really happened to Elijah Carter in the spring of 1910? Was his journal merely the product of a mind unraveling in isolation, constructing an elaborate fantasy to explain his own confusion as he succumbed to thirst, exposure, or injury in the unforgiving wilderness of the Grand Canyon? Or did he truly discover something ancient and other that has been deliberately concealed from public knowledge for over a century? The answers may lie somewhere in the restricted zone along the canyon's northern rim, behind security fences and non-disclosure agreements. Or perhaps they remain where Carter left them, in the darkness beneath the earth, waiting for the next curious explorer who, like Carter, refuses to heed the warnings of those who came before. The native peoples of the region have always maintained that some knowledge comes at too high a price, that some discoveries are better left unmade, that some doors once opened can never truly be closed again. As we conclude this documentary, we leave you with the final words found in Hualapai Elder Thomas Redcloud's interview from 1910, which were omitted from the original newspaper article but preserved in the reporter's notes. The old man leaned close to the journalist and whispered, "They are not gone, they are only sleeping. And each time we dig too deeply or venture too far into their domain, they stir a little more. One day they will awaken fully, and on that day we will understand why our ancestors feared the hollow places of the earth and the symbols carved upon the stone, why they warned us never to disturb the dreams of those who came before us and will surely come again. But of course, like Elijah Carter, we rarely heed such warnings until it is far too late. The hunger for discovery, for knowledge, for treasure hidden in dark places. It drives us forward despite the risks, ignoring the whispered cautions of the past. And sometimes that curiosity leads us to revelations that transform our understanding of history and our place within it. But sometimes it leads us to doors that should have remained forever sealed, beyond which wait ancient eyes that have been watching us all along, patiently biding their time until we once again draw near enough to hear their whispers. In